All right, welcome to your deep dive. You send in some pretty interesting research um, about industrial capitalism in the U.S. in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Really a period of huge change, and I think today we're going to try to unearth some of the most interesting insights and importantly connect them to the world we live in now, which is always the fun part.
Yeah. It's a period of contradictions, too. Incredible progress, but also a lot of times at a pretty steep human cost.
Yeah,
I think it's fascinating to trace how those decisions, made way back then still resonate with us today.
absolutely. So to set the scene, let's go back to the early 1800s. Life in the U.S. was very different. Most things were made by hand. The pace of life was much slower.
Yeah. I mean, imagine a world without mass production. Almost everything you used was, well, crafted individually, right? And it meant a different relationship with material goods altogether. People treasured things, they repaired them, they passed them down through generations.
It's almost hard to picture that now, isn't it?
It really is.
And then boom, the Industrial Revolution hits.
Yeah. And the U.S. is like right at the heart of it. New machines, new business models, this massive shift from farms to factories. What caused this whirlwind of change? Our sources point to kind of a perfect storm of factors.
It's true. It's true. One of the biggest, I would say, was innovation, right?
Yeah.
Take the cotton gin, for example.
Right.
This seemingly simple machine completely transformed how cotton was processed. I mean, making it exponentially faster.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, the textile industry could operate at a scale that had never been seen before. And that impacted, everything from clothing production to global trade.
To think we wear clothes made from cotton, every day without thinking about that technology that made it all possible.
It's amazing, yeah.
Were there other inventions that had that sort of ripple effect?
Absolutely. The Bessemer process.
Yeah.
Revolutionized steel production,
Yeah.
making it stronger and cheaper. And this made possible the skyscrapers that really define our city skylines, today.
You think about how just that one invention changed the way we live and work. The density of our cities, our commutes, the very architecture that surrounds us. It's crazy.
It's really incredible how something from the 1800s can still have such a tangible impact on our lives today.
Yeah.
It wasn't just technology driving all this change, though,
Yeah,
right?
you're right. You're right. The U.S. had another ace up its sleeve, so to speak. Abundant natural resources, coal, iron, oil, the fuel for the factories, right?
Okay.
And the raw materials for new products. I mean, it really was remarkable.
It's like the country was almost primed for this industrial explosion.
Yeah.
So we've got the technology, we've got the resources. What else contributed to all this rapid growth?
Well, think about it, right?
Yeah.
You got all these resources and goods, you got to get them around right.
Of course, yeah.
So the railroad system, it expanded like crazy. Suddenly the country's connected in a way that it just never had been before, allowing goods to be shipped, efficiently across huge distances.
Right.
Creates a truly national market.
Right. And with that new national market came a need for new ways of doing business, right?
No, absolutely. This is where, you've got these figures like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller.
Right.
I mean, these guys weren't just businessmen. They were like masterminds, and they reshaped entire industries. I mean, built these massive companies that dominated their sectors, steel, oil, using these innovative organizational structures and strategies. It's wild.
Yeah, it's almost hard to grasp the scale of their ambition and the influence that they wielded. Did this concentration of power have any downsides, though?
Well, that's a good question. While these, industrialists are building these empires, what was life like for the workers, who fueled their factories?
Right, exactly.
And then who were these workers anyway?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't forget about the human side of the story.
No, we can't.
So a massive workforce is needed to keep all these industries humming. So people leave their farms and they flock to cities, hoping for a better life. At the same time, there's all these waves of immigrants arriving in the U.S., also seeking opportunity.
That's right.
So the very fabric of American society is changing, from these rural communities to these, bustling urban centers. This influx of workers must have presented both challenges and opportunities, though, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's important to delve into the realities that these workers faced, the hopes that they held, and really the price of progress that they often had to pay.
So last time, we were talking about those massive societal shifts,
Yeah.
From a largely rural society to one increasingly defined by these, bustling urban centers.
Right.
And of course, the people who fueled that shift, the workers. It seems like the rise of industrial capitalism wasn't all, sunshine and roses for them, though, was it?
It wasn't, no. The reality for many workers during this time was, well, it was grim. Cities became so overcrowded, sanitation was poor, poverty was rampant. I mean, it wasn't exactly the American dream they had, hoped for.
So in a way, industrial capitalism created its own set of problems.
Yeah, you could say that. The very system that promised all this, progress and opportunity, it also produced this widespread hardship. And I think this tension, between progress and its costs, that's a thread that kind of runs throughout this entire era.
Okay, so we've got these booming cities, this rapidly changing social landscape, but also hardship for many. Where does the U.S. fit into the global picture at this time?
Well, the U.S. is emerging as, well, a global economic superpower, really.
Wow.
The combination of this, industrial might, these seemingly endless resources, and this growing consumer market, I mean, it really put the nation on this path to global dominance, really.
So Made in America starts to become like a symbol of industrial power.
Yeah, for sure. And it also marked a shift in, global dynamics. The U.S. is becoming a major player in international trade. Its industrial output influencing markets all over the world. And as more goods became available and, importantly, affordable, this new phenomenon takes root what we now call consumer culture.
We touched on that a bit earlier with those new inventions spurring mass production.
Right.
But how did this consumer culture take shape? It wasn't like everyone suddenly had all this like extra money to spend, right?
Well, that's where things get interesting, I think. Industrial capitalism wasn't just about producing more. It was also about creating demand.
Right.
Advertising emerged as this really powerful force, convincing people they needed the latest gadgets, the latest products.
So did this era like plant the seeds for our modern day obsession with shopping? I mean, do you think we're still dealing with the consequences of that today?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think the answer is a resounding yes. The desire for the newest, the best, the most fashionable, it all began to take shape during this era. And that drive for more, for newer, I mean, it fuels our economy and shapes our lives even now.
It's kind of like a cycle, isn't it? More goods, more desire, more production.
Exactly. Yeah. And this cycle has, these profound implications for how we think about our own consumption, our impact on the planet, and even our own identities in a world that's so saturated with, material goods. But let's not forget about the workers in all of this,
Right. Sure.
They weren't just passive bystanders in all of this. The labor movement, which starts gaining some real momentum during this time, played a critical role in kind of shaping the relationship between workers and employers.
Yeah. It seems like they had a lot to fight for.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of their key demands and how did they organize to try to achieve them?
Well, the fight for fair wages, safe working conditions, an end to child labor, I mean, that didn't end with the 1800s. It continued well into the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy. I mean, workers face opposition from these powerful business interests and, their struggle for just these basic rights often involve strikes, protests, and even violence sometimes.
Wow.
But through it all, unions became these powerful advocates for workers demanding a more equitable system.
So their efforts weren't in vain, were they? I mean, we have minimum wage laws, workplace safety regulations, the right to collective bargaining. I mean, these are all kind of echoes of those early labor struggles. Right?
Oh, absolutely. The labor movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, I mean, it just fundamentally reshaped the relationship between workers and employers in this country. And its legacy, it extends beyond the U.S. It influences labor laws, workplace standards, I mean, all over the world.
It's a good reminder that change doesn't just happen. It takes dedicated people fighting for what they believe in. It's inspiring, really.
Yeah, it is.
But it wasn't just workers pushing for a better deal. Didn't the government also start taking a more active role during this time?
Yeah, you're right. The role of government changed drastically during this period. As these industrialists amassed this, enormous wealth and power, and the plight of workers became increasingly visible, the idea that the government had a responsibility to regulate markets, prevent monopolies, protect the public interest, I mean, that started to gain traction.
So from a kind of hands-off approach to a more active role in the economy, what drove that shift?
Well, it was gradual and met with, plenty of resistance, especially from those who believed in, totally unfettered capitalism. But as the downsides of this unchecked industrial growth became more apparent, things like worker exploitation, environmental damage, the just unchecked power of monopolies, the calls for some kind of regulation, they grew louder and louder.
This must have been the beginning of what we now think of as like regulatory agencies and things like antitrust
Yeah.
laws, right?
Yeah, exactly. This era laid the groundwork for, many of the regulatory frameworks that govern our economy today. I mean, everything from environmental protection agencies to, consumer safety boards. It's a complex legacy, and one that continues to be debated. But there's no doubt that this period marked, a real turning point in how we think about the role of government in a capitalist society.
So we've got this tension between progress and its consequences, the rise of consumer culture, workers fighting for their rights, this changing role of government. It seems like this era was a real turning point in so many ways. But let's not forget about all those incredible inventions that emerged during this time. Inventions that not only changed daily life, but also had this really, profound impact on the course of history.
You're right. Perhaps no other period in human history has witnessed such a rapid pace of innovation, from the electric light to the telephone to the automobile. I mean, these inventions just revolutionized how we lived, worked, and interacted with the world.
I have to admit, I'm really curious to hear more about how these inventions transform daily life and shape the world as we know it. So we were talking about some of those, really game-changing inventions that came out of this period. It's amazing to think how in just, like a few decades, life was utterly transformed by things like the electric light, the telephone, and the automobile.
It's true.
Makes you wonder what it must have been like to experience those shifts, firsthand.
It really does. It's hard to overstate how big these changes were. I mean, imagine a world illuminated by, just candle and gaslight.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden electric light. I mean, Thomas Edison's incandescent bulb, that was more than just a new source of illumination. I mean, it was like a beacon of progress. Factories could operate, around the clock.
Right.
Which, yeah, I mean, it extended the workday, but it also increased production. Homes became brighter, safer. I mean, cities took on this whole new character, after dark.
It's like the invention of the light bulb flipped a switch.
Yeah.
Not just literally, but, figuratively. It really did illuminate a path to a more modern world, didn't it? What about the telephone? How did that change the game?
Well, before the telephone, communication over long distances, that was pretty much limited to letters and telegrams.
Right.
Alexander Graham Bell's invention of the telephone in 1876, I mean, that just revolutionized how we connect. Suddenly, people could have real-time conversations across, huge distances.
It must have felt like magic.
Oh, I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, it just broke down barriers of time and space. It allowed businesses to operate more efficiently, families to stay in touch more easily, and news to travel much faster. It's kind of crazy to think how much our world relies on, just instant communication today.
Right. But it all started back then.
It's interesting how something we just take for granted now was once a marvel of innovation.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget about the automobile. Was America's love affair with the car, was it instantaneous, or did that take some time to catch on?
It wasn't love at first sight.
Okay.
I mean, early automobiles, they were expensive, unreliable, and frankly, a bit scary to those accustomed to horses, right?
I can imagine. It must have been quite a shock to see these, noisy, smoky contraptions sputtering down the road.
Yeah, exactly. But visionaries like Henry Ford, I mean, they saw the potential, right?
Right.
I mean, they revolutionized the manufacturing process with the assembly line. The Model T, introduced in 1908. I mean, that became the first car to be truly accessible to the average American.
So Ford didn't just invent a car, he democratized access to it.
He did, yeah.
It's really incredible to think about how much the automobile has shaped our lives. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about freedom, mobility, and even our sense of, identity, I think.
That's true. Yeah, the automobile's ripple effects, I mean, they extend way beyond transportation. I mean, it reshaped our cities, right?
Right.
Fueled the growth of suburbs, transformed industries, and even impacted our relationship with the environment, for better or for worse.
And those consequences, I mean, both the positive and the negative, we're still debating those today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like the legacy of this era is as much about the challenges it created as the progress that it achieved.
That's true. And it wasn't just about, technological innovation either. This era also saw the rise of new ways of thinking about, business, society, and even the role of government. For
Right.
example, social Darwinism kind of emerged as a way to justify the vast wealth accumulated by these, industrialists like Carnegie and Rockefeller. Um, this idea, which basically applied the concept of survival of the fittest to society, was used to argue that those who succeeded in business were, inherently superior.
But isn't that a pretty simplistic view of success? I mean, it seems to ignore all the systemic factors that contribute to inequality.
Yeah.
Not to mention the exploitation of workers.
Yeah, you're right to question that. I mean, social Darwinism was and remains a pretty controversial concept. It often served to, reinforce these existing power structures and justify social inequalities. Thankfully, it wasn't the only ideology that took root during this time.
And so there were alternative ways of thinking about these issues.
Yeah, yeah. As the downsides of this, kind of unchecked industrial growth became more evident, movements like the progressive era emerged, right?
Okay.
And they advocated for social reform and government intervention to address the problems created by, industrial capitalism, things like poverty, child labor, dangerous working conditions.
So push for a more equitable system, for some kind of safety net to protect those who were struggling.
Exactly, yeah. Progressives, they championed causes like worker safety, child labor laws, women's suffrage. I mean, they believed that government had a responsibility to kind of mitigate the negative consequences of, just unbridled capitalism and promote a more just society.
So it was an ideological battle, really.
It was, yeah.
Individualism versus collectivism,
Hmm.
limited government versus a more active role for government in regulating the economy and protecting workers. It's fascinating how those debates still resonate today.
Yeah, it's almost as if the seeds of our current political and social divides were kind of sown during this
Yeah.
era. But that's what makes history so compelling, right?
Right.
It's not just a collection of, facts and dates. It's a living tapestry that connects directly to our present.
You've given me a lot to think about. So to bring it back to our listener, the person who brought us all this fascinating research, what's the key takeaway from all of this?
Well, I'd say the most important lesson is that, history isn't just something that happened in the past.
Right.
It's a force that continues to shape our world today. And by understanding, the decisions made, the challenges faced, the triumphs and failures of those who came before us, I mean, we can gain some really valuable insights into, the issues that we're grappling with today.
It's like holding a mirror up to the past
Ah.
and seeing reflections of our present.
Yeah, exactly. And perhaps by understanding the patterns and the choices that led us here, we can make more informed decisions about the kind of future we want to create.
Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening. Thank you for taking us on this journey through such a pivotal period in American history. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our listener has too.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listener, I encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating era. Delve into the primary sources, the personal stories, the debates and controversies that just make history so compelling.
Yeah. And remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how we got here and using that knowledge to shape a better future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.